Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar on CTE and dual enrollment, evidence from New York City's P-TECH high schools and North Carolina's career and college promise. This webinar is coming to you today from the CTE Research Network. And I'm Kathy Hughes. I'm a principal researcher with the American Institutes for Research. AIR is a not-for-profit research and technical assistance organization with about 1,500 employees around the world. Our mission is to generate and use evidence for a better and more equitable world. And I'm also the principal investigator and director of the CTE Research Network. I'm joined today by two colleagues from the network. Dr. Julie Edmunds, she's the director of the Early College Research Center at SERV, the University of North Carolina, Greensboro. She conducts research on issues primarily related to high school reform. She's led numerous program evaluations and has been principal investigator for numerous grants that use an experimental design to investigate the impact of the early college high school model on student outcomes. She's currently the principal investigator for the evaluation of career and college promise, and that's North Carolina's statewide dual enrollment program. And that study is part of the research network, the CTE Research Network. And we also have Dr. Rachel Rosen. She is with MDRC. She is the director of MDRC's Center for Effective Career and Technical Education, which incubates new ideas, synthesizes findings and lessons learned, and disseminates this knowledge to policymakers, practitioners, and other researchers to ensure that the expansion of CTE is informed by evidence. She leads the evaluation of New York City's P-TECH model. It's a lottery-based impact study, as she'll explain, and it's examining the impact of New York City's 6-year high school model, where students can earn both a high school diploma and an associate degree while having work-based learning experiences. Next slide, please. The goal of the CTE Research Network is to expand the evidence base on CTE with a focus on causal research. It is funded by the Institute of Education Sciences, that's IES, and IES is the nonpartisan research arm of the U.S. Department of Education. And IES recognized that while there is a lot of research on CTE, you may be familiar with a lot of it, it has primarily been descriptive or correlational or qualitative. And there is a need for more causal studies where we can really show cause and effect. Does CTE cause students to have different outcomes than they otherwise would have had? Does CTE benefit students, and which students, in which contexts? So we have 6 participating research teams. It's like a professional community. They're all conducting causal research in CTE with U.S. Department of Education grants. Let me show you what the six studies are on the next slide. We have one on the Connecticut technical high schools. There's one on all of CTE, in New York City, hundreds and hundreds of programs. We previously had webinars on the findings of those 2 projects, and there are reports on those projects on the CTE Research Network website. And then today you'll hear about the P-TECH 914 schools study and the evaluation of career and college promise study with Rachel and Julie. The 2 studies at the bottom, another MDRC study led by Rachel on the impact of technology-based career advising tools, and then the evaluation of virtual enterprises. Those 2 studies are still ongoing. We don't yet have results for those, so stay tuned. And also coming up, I want to let you know, we have conducted an evidence review of all of the causal research of the past 20 years, and it will be released not even later this year, but later this month. So watch for that. Be sure you've signed up for our social media updates, and you'll see when that is released. And I'll just, to give you a preview, it's a lot of positive news for CTE. And we also have coming up March 20th in Crystal City, Virginia, in conjunction with ACTE's National Policy Seminar, we have a one-day free event where we'll be sharing all of what has come out of the CTE Research Network over the last 5.5 years or so. We're going to have CTE researchers, practitioners, policymakers. It will be quite an event. So you can still register for that. You can still join us if you'd like to do so. And one more announcement, the CTE Research Network 2.0. Next slide, please, Tara. Yep, thank you. We have been awarded the next iteration of the CTE Research Network. I'm continuing as the director, along with Sean Doherty of Boston College. ACT is again a partner, and we have a new partner, the Career and Technical Education Policy Exchange at Georgia State. And we're going to build on our momentum, continue to serve as a hub for CTE research, training, leadership, and dissemination. We don't know yet who those research teams will be, what the studies will focus on, so stay tuned. And if you go to the website for the original CTE Research Network, there is an announcement of the next iteration and some information there. More to come. So thank you all again for joining us. And now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Rosen.
Thanks so much, Kathy, and thanks, Tara, for starting the slides. Hi, everyone. It's nice to see such a big turnout for this event. As Kathy said, my name is Rachel Rosen, and I'm going to be talking about the results of our evaluation of the P-TECH 914 schools in New York City. Next slide, please. So for those of you who don't know, MDRC is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that conducts rigorous studies of programs and policies that affect people with low incomes. We work to actively disseminate those lessons to policymakers and practitioners, and to provide evidence to help make programs and agencies more effective. Next slide, please. So today I'm going to be talking about our evaluation of the New York City P-TECH 914 schools. This is the first rigorous evaluation of the P-TECH model of high schools. And we feel like this evidence is important because P-TECH is a model that has proved to be very popular. It has scaled very quickly. There are over 200 P-TECH schools in Texas. There are over 50 in New York. They are spread across 13 other states and several countries internationally. And this is the first causal evidence to be produced about the model. So the questions that we were asking in this study is, what is the impact of P-TECH on high school progress, graduation, post-secondary enrollment, and degree attainment? And today I'm going to be talking about our final results mostly on post-secondary enrollments, but also some high school progress outcomes. This was a randomized controlled lottery design study. It had approximately 3,100 students who began 9th grade in New York City in the years 2013 through 2017. And the study was funded by IES. Next slide, please. So what is P-TECH? So the P-TECH model has a variety of components. They are, as Kathy said, they are 6-year high schools in which students get a high school diploma and an applied associate's degree at a partner college simultaneously. And each school also has one or more industry partners that provides work-based learning opportunities, mentoring opportunities, those kinds of things for students in the schools. In the high schools, the schools have accelerated coursework and exam taking that allows students to begin work on college coursework earlier in their high school trajectory. They also provide coursework in CTE and soft skills instruction, and they provide college and career advising. Work-based learning activities include things like site visits, guest speakers, mentoring, internships, all of those kinds of things. And the college activities include a partnership with in this case, one of the City University of New York campuses. They provide early college dual enrollment courses that students can take in conjunction with that college partner. And the high school supports students to attend grades 13 and 14, and each school allows students to earn one of two applied associate's degrees that are in the fields that are related to the work of the industry partner, with the idea being that students will then be prepared to work in the fields of the industry partners. Next slide, please. So this study had three components. It had an implementation study, an impact study, and a cost study. From our implementation findings, we found one of the big findings was that in most of the schools in New York City, graduating with the affiliated associate's degree was not the primary goal. It was considered one of many potential options and post-secondary opportunities for students. And this may or may not be particular to how schools are set up in New York City. All the P-TECH schools maintain a dual focus on college and career. And all the study schools do provide opportunities for students to engage in college classes, career exploration, and work-based learning activities. So they all have those opportunities, whether or not all students engage in them. They all have the opportunity to do so. One of the other things we found, however, was that running the P-TECH model schools requires a substantial amount of coordination and relationship management between the high school, the employer, and the college partners. So some of the schools had dedicated staff who had the roles of managing industry partnerships and relationships. There were liaisons with different colleges that provided that bridge between the high school and the college. So there was a lot of coordination across the partnerships. And then, we began this study in 2017, and we did not plan to have the COVID-19 pandemic occur at the same time as the study, but that's what happened. And the pandemic interrupted the implementation of many of the elements of P-TECH, and schools adapted in various ways to still do their best to provide students with college and career opportunities during the COVID years. Next slide, please. So one of the other things that we found was that there was substantial variation in the schools between how different opportunities were decided upon within the schools, which students were encouraged to do dual enrollment, which students were encouraged to do internships, that kind of things. And for the most part, what we found was that the factors that drove these variation had to do with different relationships with different partners. Some of the employer partners had greater capacity to provide opportunities for students than others. And in schools that had partners that had less capacity, they tended to have more partners, where larger organizations that had a lot of capacity partnered with schools and tended to be a single partner. There was also some variation between schools in requirements for participation in activities like internships or mostly in the work-based learning types of opportunities. And then other things that drove variation was student interest. Sometimes one of the things that happens is students come into the school in 9th grade and they decide, this is not actually what I want to do. And so that was one of the things that drove the variation, was that schools felt like they still needed to support those students to achieve whatever they considered to be success for themselves, whether or not it was the associate's degrees that were offered through that school. Next slide, please. So as Kathy mentioned, and as I said, this study was a randomized control design study. We utilized the New York City high school admissions lottery. So in New York City, students rank up to 12 high schools that they are interested in attending. And there is an algorithm that places students in those schools based on their choice and availability of slots. In this study, we include only students who ranked one of the 7 P-TECH schools as their first choice school. That's who was included in the study sample. And so we were able to compare students who won a seat to attend a P-TECH school with students who randomly lost the opportunity to attend a P-TECH school, but all of whom wanted to indicate it on their choice application that they wanted to attend a P-TECH school first. Next slide, please. So one of the other things that we needed to consider in an impact study is what does the comparison setting look like, because the impact is the comparison between what the students in the program group got and the comparison to what other students got. So in this case, because of the lottery design, the students in the comparison setting were spread across 399 other high schools in New York City, which was virtually, there's about 450 high schools in New York City, so it was virtually every other high school in New York City. So to try to understand what the comparison condition looked like, we looked broadly at policies related to college and career across the district, as well as to surveys that are administered annually by the district. So what we found was that at the time this study was taking place, there were concerted efforts across the district to increase students' awareness of access to college and work-based learning opportunities, but in other settings, it was not as intense as in the P-TECH setting. In the surveys, we found that teachers in P-TECH schools reported higher overall school quality and rated their principal's leadership more highly as compared to teachers in the schools that the students in the comparison group attended. However, between the two groups, teachers, parents, and students did not report significant differences in the degree of post-secondary college counseling or post-secondary counseling available to students in the different kinds of schools. Next slide, please. Excuse me. So in this study, the outcomes that we were looking at, and I won't have time to go through all of them in this presentation, but in the full report, you can read about these. We looked at high school outcomes, including participation in internships, the accumulation of high school academic and CTE credits, dual enrollment credit accumulation, high school graduation, and enrollment and degree earning in 2- and 4-year colleges. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we use the high school lottery to create comparable groups. One of the things to know about this lottery, however, is that there are students who are placed in P-TECH schools not through a random process, and those students are not included in this study. However, this study includes 53% of seats in P-TECHs were offered through a random lottery process, and there's more detail about this in the report. I see a question, Tara? No. Okay, sorry. Okay, next slide, please. So one question is sort of at baseline, who is in the sample? And we have about 1,400 students, about 1,500 students in the P-TECH lottery winners group, and about 1,700 students in the other comparison group. And mostly the students looked the same across groups. I think the thing to note in this table is that the students in the analysis sample were pretty academically low performing when they were in 8th grade. So the vast majority of them performed in levels 1 and 2, which are the two lowest test levels in math and ELA prior to being in the lottery and prior to entering high school. Next slide, please. So what did we find? So these findings show student participation in internships. So in the full sample, students in P-TECH schools, about 38% were 38 percentage points more likely to have an internship during high school. This was higher for the cohort of students who attended high school prior to COVID, but even during COVID, students in P-TECH schools had substantially more internships than students in other kinds of schools. And this was a little bit higher for female students than male students, but not hugely different on internships. Next slide, please. Students in P-TECH schools also earned more dual enrollment credits than students in the comparison setting. So on average, they earned 4.5 more credits during high school through dual enrollment programs than students in the comparison setting. And again, this was higher for students who attended high school prior to COVID lockdowns, which is not surprising, but it was also still higher in the P-TECH group for students who attended high school during COVID. And male and female students earned approximately the same, roughly the same number of credits more than the students in the comparison group. Next slide, please. So the outcomes, so what we looked at was post-secondary degree earnings for students in years 1, 2, and 3 after what would have been the end of a traditional 4-year high school experience. And what we found was that in year 1, students students in the P-TECH sample earned about 2% of students in the P-TECH sample had earned a post-secondary degree by the end of 1 year after the end of high school. And while this is really small, we included it because most post-secondary research does not look at 1 year after high school because it's so rare for students to earn degrees. So there was a small but substantial number of P-TECH students who earned enough credits in high school to be able to earn a degree by 1 year after the end, 1 year after the end of traditional high school. And here we also looked at differences between males and females, and we see that after 1 year, both males and females are earning more degrees than students in the comparison group, with females earning slightly more degrees by that point in time. Next slide, please. By the end of 2 years, we don't see a statistically significant difference in the full sample in the earning of degrees. However, what we're starting to see here is real differences in the impacts between males and females. We see that for female students, young women in the comparison group and young women in the P-TECH group are performing at approximately the same rate, whereas males in the P-TECH group are earning degrees at much higher rates than males in the comparison group, and we are seeing the impact there. Next slide, please. And by the end of year 3, we see that in the full sample, about 5 percentage points, students are in the P-TECH group are about 5 percentage points more likely to have earned a post-secondary degree at this point in time. However, this is pretty much entirely driven by impacts on young men, where what we see again is that female students are performing roughly equally well, regardless of what setting they're in, but young men who have gone through the P-TECH experience are obtaining degrees at much higher rates than young men in the comparison setting. Next slide, please. We also did a cost study, and we found we were able to look at costs for 2 of the cohorts in the study that were the 2 cohorts that we could follow for the entire 6 years of the program. And we did find that it is somewhat more expensive to for secondary school costs for students in the P-TECH group. This is mostly driven by how P-TECHs are run in New York City. So all the P-TECH schools have a city CTE designation, which they get additional funding for. There was also a dedicated central office staff who provided support to the network of P-TECH schools across the city. Industry partners provided investments in the schools for the students, and schools also received secondary education funding for students who continued in years 13 and 14. We did find bigger cost differences at the post-secondary level, which was mostly driven by the offering of dual enrollment credits, which were free to students. Next slide, please. The results of our cost study, however, were inconclusive, as we found that the 2 cohorts that we followed engaged in dual enrollment at different rates. And so the earlier cohort, which took up dual enrollment more frequently than the later cohort, we did find that the model was overall cost effective. However, it was not cost effective when fewer students took up the opportunities for dual enrollment and post-secondary participation. So we're still somewhat inconclusive on the cost study. Next slide, please. In conclusion, what we found was that the P-TECH model in New York City is supporting more students to earn post-secondary degrees, particularly young men. However, it's really important to note that young women are performing equally or approximately equally in both settings, and that comparison group males are performing less well in other settings, and that is really what's driving the impact, is the difference between the comparison group males and the P-TECH males. And P-TECH may be helping provide support for young men, helping them make important transitions between secondary and post-secondary. And I think just one more slide. Yeah, and if I saw that there are some questions popping up in the chat. And then if you want to read the full report, you can go to this QR code, and there is my contact information as well. Tara, do you want me to handle those questions now, or should I wait until the end?
I think we have a couple of minutes if we want to address some of the questions now. So we did have questions around the differences in sex or gender that you were seeing, and what you may be attributing some of that difference, that differential effect for males. And I think you may have addressed some of that. There's also a question about labor market outcomes. Any information you have on that? And did students at comparison schools have as many opportunities to participate in concurrent enrollment and work-based learning?
Yeah, thanks, Tara. I think for the labor market outcomes, we don't have those yet. We are in the process of pursuing the ability to do those analysis. That's something that we would like to be able to do as well. But I think it's important to remember this is a 6-year model. And so our last cohort of students, I think, is in their 6th year this year, or maybe it was last year. So many of the kids in the sample have not been in the labor market very long. Even though it seems like it's a long trajectory, it's also a long program, and it takes kids a long time to age through it. But we are trying to get those data to be able to do those analyses. The question for more information on what do I think about the gender outcomes, I mean, I think they're really compelling. I think they also in with a lot of what we see across a variety of CTE studies. So there are several other CTE studies that have found positive impacts driven by results for young men. MDRC's study of career academies also found that long-term earnings impacts were primarily driven by impacts on young men. There's another study by Sean Doherty that shows the same thing. So I think it's a pattern that's worth looking at in the wider CTE community. Is what is it about CTE that is providing success for young men that they maybe aren't finding in other settings? And it's also, you know, it's particularly notable, I think, for the post-secondary findings, because we know from a lot of literature that young men are enrolling in and completing post-secondary degrees at lower rates than young women. And if we are finding ways to provide transitions that provide success for young men, then that's worth paying attention to. But I think it's a question that's broader for the field about what is it about CTE that we're seeing consistent positive results for young men. And I think, was there one more? Did I get them all?
We'll take one. The last question is about, did you think that the comparison school students had as many opportunities as your treatment schools?
Yeah, so they did not. I mean, I think that's baked into the design. So as we find that students have engaged in more dual enrollment opportunities and more internship opportunities, I think that what that tells us is that the model is working as designed. In some ways, that's the answer to an implementation question. That both students in both types of schools had access to dual enrollment, but they were through different channels through the University of New York, and students in the comparison setting were capped at the number of credits that they could earn during high school, and students in the early college high schools had the opportunity to earn more credits, although they both did have access to dual enrollment. So I think that's part of the design. And what we see is that the schools were working as designed.
Great, thank you so much. And we are going to transition now to Julie Edmunds, and we will have more time for questions at the end of her presentation.
All right. Are we seeing my slides? Okay, wonderful. Let me just get myself sorted here. So delighted to be here with you all today. My name again is Julie Edmunds. I'm director of the Early College Research Center. We're a relatively new center, and we conduct, synthesize, and disseminate research related to early college, the early college model, dual enrollment, and other topics related to college and career readiness and the transition to post-secondary. I'm delighted today to talk about our study on the impact of career and technical education dual enrollment. So there's 3 main points that I'm going to make in today's presentation. So really, first, CTE dual enrollment is a pathway that allows a broad range of students to take post-secondary courses while they're in high school. CTE dual enrollment we often see is kind of treated as an afterthought, so something potentially less than a pathway that would provide courses leading to to transfer to a four-year institution, but it really should be considered as a good option for students. The second point is when we look at participation, we see that CTE dual enrollment participation trends are more equitable than the trends that we generally see with dual enrollment. And finally, student participation in CTE dual enrollment leads to more positive high school outcomes and increases in some types of post-secondary credentials. And we're going to talk more about all of these. So the research included in this presentation comes from the evaluation of career and college promise, as Kathy was talking about earlier. This is a 5-year, actually, by the time we're done, it'll probably be a 6-year study of North Carolina's statewide dual enrollment program. And it's funded, again, by the Institute of Education Sciences at the U.S. Department of Education. Very grateful for that funding. It's allowed us to do a lot of really interesting and useful things. The project has the goal of conducting a formal and rigorous evaluation of the implementation, impact, and cost of the 3 different CCP pathways. And it also has a goal of developing the partnering state agencies' capacity to work with researchers and use data to improve the program. The study includes 4 partners. So the Early College Research Center at SERV at UNCG is the prime. And we are working with 2 wonderful state agencies, the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction and the North Carolina Community College System. And then RAND Corporation works with us on research. So Career and College Promise, or I might say CCP, they're the same thing, is basically legislation that reorganized North Carolina's existing and very extensive dual enrollment offerings into 3 primary pathways. So on the left here is the college transfer pathway. This pathway is implemented in regular comprehensive high schools, and it allows students to take dual enrollment courses that lead to an associate degree and meet the gen ed requirements at a 4-year college. On the far right, the pathway is the Cooperative Innovative High Schools pathway. And these are small schools that really represent strong partnerships between secondary and post-secondary, and they provide students the opportunity to earn an associate degree or 2 years of college credit. And these are often known as early colleges across the country. However, the one in the center is the one that we're going to pay attention to today. And this is the CTE dual enrollment pathway. And this allows students to earn college credits that lead to technical credentials or workforce-based majors. Now, here's a little bit more information about the CTE dual enrollment pathway. First, it's important to note that the state pays for tuition, so the courses are free to students, although there may be additional costs for books and materials that may be borne by the students depending on the district. As noted earlier, the CTE dual enrollment pathway provides community college courses that lead to a diploma, certificate, or workforce-based major. Within the overall pathway are more specific programs of study. And these programs of study differ by community college depending on what those offerings are at the college. Most courses are taken by juniors and seniors, and to participate in the pathway, students must have a recommendation and demonstrate academic readiness, although students can get a waiver of the academic readiness requirement. Then most CTE dual enrollment courses do not transfer to a 4-year institution. However, there are some programs of study that do include courses that could transfer to a 4-year. Freshmen and sophomores can participate in a select set of curriculum programs of study as listed on the screen. And to be eligible to participate, 9th and 10th grade students have to demonstrate academic readiness and have recommendations. So I'm going to share a couple of CCP CTE programs of study. These are coming from Wake Tech, so Wake Technical Community College. This is our largest community college in the state, and they have a real large range of offerings for CCP students. This one's a biopharmaceutical technology program of study. It has 5 classes that students can take, a total of 16 credit hours. This program of study is a nurse's aid certificate, and it includes 4 courses that also have labs and clinical hours. So even though CTE dual enrollment is actually implemented across many states, there's actually very little research on it, including very limited information about participation. So that was the first thing that we looked at. When we looked at North Carolina's participation rates by subgroups, we found that participation in CTE dual enrollment is actually generally more equitable than dual enrollment more broadly. So this chart, there's a lot going on in this chart, so I'm going to spend a minute kind of unpacking it for people. So essentially, this chart shows the percentage of 12th graders who are participating in the CTE dual enrollment pathway, so only in the CTE dual enrollment pathway in 2019-20. The dotted line over here shows that the overall percentage of 12th graders taking CTE dual enrollment is about 7%. So about 7% of North Carolina's 12th graders are participating in the CTE dual enrollment pathway. We then looked at participation for specific subgroups. So on this slide, we're focusing on participation by gender, by race, ethnicity, and by socioeconomic status. And we're considering the proportion of 12th graders in each subgroup that are taking dual enrollment. And so doing it this way allows us to easily compare participation rates across subgroups, regardless of the number of students in that subgroup. So bars that are close to the dotted line mean that the participation rate for 12th graders in that subgroup is similar to the average participation rate. Bars that are substantially below the dotted line can be considered as underrepresented. And bars that are substantially above the dotted line can be considered as overrepresented. So when we look at participation by gender, we see that about 7% of 12th grade males and 7% of 12th grade females participate in CTE dual enrollment. Thus, the two groups have similar participation rates. We see the same for socioeconomic status here on the right. About 7% of economically disadvantaged 12th graders and 7% of not economically disadvantaged 12th graders participate. We're looking at race ethnicity. We see that Hispanic, Native American, and white students are relatively pretty close to representative. Asian students actually participate at the lowest rate. Only about 3% of Asian 12th graders are participating. The CTE dual enrollment pathway thus does not show many of the same disparities that we see in regular dual enrollment. For those of you who are familiar with the broader research on regular dual enrollment, you know that these trends are not necessarily what we see. And for comparison, I'm actually going to show you a similar chart for the college transfer pathway. So as a reminder, the college transfer pathway provides students with the courses that meet the gen ed requirements of a four-year institution. And so overall, really, there are more students participating in this pathway. So about 17% of 12th graders in North Carolina participate in this pathway. We also see wide disparities by gender, for example, with female students almost twice as likely to participate as male students. Black students are substantially underrepresented, as are Hispanic students, while white students are overrepresented, and economically disadvantaged students are about half as likely to participate as non-economically disadvantaged. This is kind of the more typical pattern of participation that we see with dual enrollment. What this does suggest that if you are looking at participation in dual enrollment, you'll want to consider the type of dual enrollment that students are taking, because those participation patterns may look really different across the different kinds of dual enrollment. We also wanted to explore differences in participation by school level factors. One of the key findings from our analysis was that we found very different participation rates by locale. So about 5% of students in urban and suburban districts, that's the urban category here, participate in CTE dual enrollment compared to about 12% of students who attend schools in rural and small town areas. That's that rural area. This is at least partially driven by the fact that urban schools have more access to other advanced course options, such as advanced placement. However, I believe it's also really important to note that AP does not really offer equivalent courses focused in these CTE areas. Okay, so far we know about 7% of 12th graders access the CTE pathway. Access to this pathway is more equitable than with dual enrollment more broadly, and some of the largest disparities are actually by locale, with rural students much more likely to participate than urban students. So let's now move to look at the impact of participating in the CTE dual enrollment pathway. Quick overview of the methods. So CCP was implemented statewide starting in 2012, and we are looking retrospectively at what's happened. So our impact study uses the design where we compare CTE dual enrollment pathway participants with students not taking any type of dual enrollment pathway. So students in our comparison group could not have been enrolled in another CCP pathway, but they could have taken AP courses. And in fact, both groups could have taken AP courses. Our sample's big, so it's approximately 650,000 students, and we're starting from 2012-13 going through 2021. We did exclude students who took a CTE dual enrollment pathway in 9th or 10th grade. So this is just looking at students who who enrolled in those pathways in 11th and 12th grade. Now we know that students who choose to participate in dual enrollment are not going to be the same as students who don't participate. So we can't just compare outcomes for the two groups. So we use an approach known as propensity score weighting, which allows us to create two groups that are very similar to each other on characteristics such as gender, race, ethnicity, economically disadvantaged status, middle school achievement, and then probably most importantly, course taking in 9th and 10th grade. So we weight them according to CTE, whether they were taking CTE courses in 9th and 10th grade and honors or AP course taking, both of which should be highly indicative of the path that students are taking. We have a real range of data sources. So we've got data from the North Carolina Community College System, North Carolina Department of Public Construction, the University of North Carolina System, and the National Student Clearinghouse. And this latter allows us to look at enrollment and degree attainment in private and out-of-state institutions, as well as in the state institutions. Caveat, of course, we're using a matching approach, so there may be some unmeasured student characteristics that we are not capturing. However, in the absence of a rigorous experimental study, we believe that this is a really strong design. So let's start by looking at high school outcomes. We're looking at 3 outcomes here, and those are listed in the first column. The second column is the average for the CCP-CTE participants. The second column is the average for our non-participants. The non-participants' averages are statistically weighted to make sure that the two groups have those similar background characteristics. And then the final column shows the difference. Differences that are statistically significant or very unlikely to occur by chance are identified by the stars. So the first outcome is the number of college credits that students earned in high school. Similar to Rachel's point earlier, this is sort of like a the outcome, meaning if we don't see impacts here, then really the program's not working at all. So it's kind of your first question about implementation. So we do see that CTE dual enrollment participants earned close to 11 credits, which is slightly more than 3 college courses. The comparison group earned about 2 credits, which is less than 1 course. Those credits were likely earned in the comparison group by passing an exam associated with an AP course. And remember that credits from AP exams can be earned in both of our groups and are included in those college credit numbers. The next outcome is unweighted GPA. There's nothing really going on with GPA when we look at these things. When we look at weighted GPA, it's a positive impact, but it's really not practically significant. And the impacts are usually around like 0.01 or something like that. So it's really not meaningful impacts. We do see a positive and statistically significant impact on high school graduation. Now, one thing that you're looking at is you may go, wow, these are really high graduation rates for both of these groups. There's 2 things going on here. First, as a reminder, we identified the students starting in 11th grade. So anybody, these are not cohort graduation rates, right? Anybody who dropped out in 9th or 10th grade, they don't even make it into our sample. Second, students that choose to take dual enrollment courses really are more highly engaged in school, and you would expect that they would have higher high school graduation rates. Despite these high graduation rates, where you would say actually there's not a lot of room for movement, we actually do see a statistically significant positive impact of almost 2 percentage points. We also have findings relative to the attainment of post-secondary credentials. So we're looking at 4 outcomes here. First is attainment of any post-secondary credential, certificate, diploma, associate, or bachelor's within 6 years after 12th grade. And then we break those degrees out by type, certificate, or associate, or 4 years degrees. So we're looking at receipt of certificates/diplomas and associate degrees within 3 years after 12th grade and bachelor's degree within 6 years. In this chart, the navy blue bars are the CTE dual enrollment participants and the teal bars are our non-participants. That's our comparison group. We see significant and positive impacts for earning any post-secondary credential. And this is driven primarily by very large impacts on certificate attainment. CTE dual enrollment students are over 4 times as likely to earn a certificate. So certificate or diploma as a comparison student. And these are certificates or diplomas that are awarded by the community colleges. So they're not necessarily industry certifications. There's also a positive 4 percentage point impact on associate degree attainment. However, when we do look at bachelor's degrees, we see a small but statistically significant negative impact of approximately 2 percentage points. This means that CTE dual enrollment students are less likely to earn bachelor's than the comparison students. This suggests that we're seeing some steering away from 4-year to 2 years. Is this a good thing? I don't know, or bad thing, I don't know. Could be a good thing if students are being encouraged to earn credentials that are more aligned with their workforce interests. On the other hand, the literature is very clear that there is a wage premium on average for individuals with bachelor's degrees. Of course, those wage premiums depend on the bachelor degree, and it depends on the other degrees that students might have. And we also looked at outcome by 2 STEM CTE pathways, mostly because we anticipated that these findings might be different from these pathways. On the left is the definition used by the Department of Homeland Security to issue STEM visas. This can be thought of as kind of classic STEM, and it includes applied STEM fields such as computer science, IT, biotech, etc. It excludes any health sciences. However, about 1/3 of our students are taking health sciences courses, so we also looked at separately at those courses. These are all the outcomes that you just saw, so the same outcomes as we looked at for the entire population. The impacts, again, we've got our CCP participants and our non-participants. These impact estimates are the ones in bold. So those are the ones that you want to pay attention to here. For the Homeland Security definition of STEM, for those courses, we see positive impacts on high school graduation rates and total number of college credits earned. There's a null impact on GPA, so basically following the same trends as we saw overall. Health sciences see the same thing, slightly more positive on high school graduation rates. There's some interesting stuff going on in post-secondary outcomes, and we do see some differences in impacts between the 2 pathways. Both pathways have positive impacts on any credentials, certificates, and associate degrees. There is no significant impact on bachelor's degree for the classical STEM pathway, so we don't see that negative. It's trending negative, but it's not statistically significant. We do see a statistically significant and slightly larger impact than the overall for the health sciences students. And we also see that the size of the post-secondary impacts are smaller for health sciences on average. For example, the impact on associate degree attainment is about half as large for the health sciences as for that more traditional classical STEM. Our partners, our agency's partners, suggest that this may be due to a narrowing of the pipeline that occurs with students in health sciences pathways, particularly as they move towards doing their clinical work, because this clinical work often has limited numbers of spaces. We do hope to explore more about what's going on with that health sciences pathway, in particular in future research. We also looked at impacts by subgroup, and overall we see similar results for subgroups as with the overall findings. In other words, if the results were positive overall, they were positive for all subgroups. However, we do see differences by subgroup in a few places. And back to this gender story, we see a larger impact on overall credential attainment for males than for females, which was driven primarily by a larger impact actually on certificates. Males were much more likely to earn certificates than females. There were also larger impacts on associate degree attainment for students who were not economically disadvantaged in our white and Asian students. And so our current working theory with that is that these were students who were not necessarily considering a community college and were encouraged to reconsider their options, or because of their participation in community college course, might have thought of community college as a more valid option. Interestingly, we do not see the same negative impacts on bachelor's degree attainment for our underrepresented minority students or for our economically disadvantaged students. So just to highlight the key points again, CTE dual enrollment really, it's a viable pathway for students. Participation is more equitable than many other dual enrollment opportunities, and we see many positive benefits from dual enrollment participation. I want to leave you with a few resources. Feel free to visit our website, earlycollegeresearch.uncg.edu. There's a link to the operating procedures, which will provide more info about how the 3 CCP pathways are implemented. And there's also a link to the program description at the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. And then there's my email. Please feel free to reach out if you have any follow-up questions. So I'm going to stop here, turn it back to Tara.
We do have a couple of questions in the chat. Let me start with how many courses make up a CTE dual enrollment pathway?
So that's really going to depend on the program of study that students are taking. So in the examples that I gave you there, the nurse's aide and the biotechnology pathway, they have different numbers of courses that lead to different credentials. So it's really going to depend on the pathway students are taking.
And another here is, did you do any analysis looking at students with a disability or students that had an IEP or 504 plan?
Yeah, so students in general, students with disabilities are much less likely to take dual enrollment courses. We haven't done a lot of analysis looking at them as a particular subgroup because of that reason. That being said, there's a lot of interest in the broader field about looking at, particularly in dual enrollment more broadly, making sure that students with disabilities are able to take advantages of take advantage of participating in dual enrollment courses. So that's something for future analysis.
And then another question that came in, are individuals in North Carolina looking at opportunities to provide services, dual enrollment services to adult learners who are in high school equivalency programs?
Well, that's a great question. We have not looked at that. We're hopeful that we'll have a project that will get started soon that's going to look at participation in alternative schools and in justice. So, for students who are incarcerated, but that's a good, yeah, I'm trying to think now whether we would have the data to do that, but that's a great question. I'm going to write it down. We'll see.
Great. I encourage folks, if you have additional questions for either Julie or Rachel, please add them to the chat, or you're welcome to come off mute and ask in person here.
There was an earlier question
Did I miss one? Thank you.
about the PTEC study, whether that had any disaggregation by race or ethnicity or other subgroups in addition to the male-female disaggregation.
We did not disaggregate the results by race. The sample was primarily Black and Hispanic, and we did not disaggregate between those two groups. And then for other racial groups, we just didn't have enough sample to have done it. But we did not look at it that way. I mean, we looked at the gender subgroup because we had an earlier brief on dual enrollment where we started to see differences between males and females, and we wanted to follow that through to the end of post-secondary to see what that looked like, but also because of this literature base that we have where we see differential results for males and females across a variety of CTE programs. And so we thought we had a literature base to do that. The other level of disaggregation that we did do, I did allude to a little bit, which is the students who had all of their high school experience before the COVID lockdowns, and then the students who had their high school experiences disrupted by the COVID lockdowns. So those were the two different subgroups that we did.
A new question just came in. For the PTEC study, were there any observed differences between the types of pathways or industry focus?
We didn't have the data to be able to look at it that way. So our post-secondary data we had on degree enrollment and completion, but it was not broken down by field of study at the post-secondary level. So we were not able to do that.
And Rachel, how many students were in your sample?
The full sample is about 3,100 students.
Great. Final call for questions. Anyone else have questions? Let me I'll add the CTE Research Network website back in here. We want to thank everyone for joining today. Later this month, we will be posting recordings from our webinar series to the website. We will encourage you to check that out. And last question came in, Julie. Could you repeat what you said about dual enrollment in prison education programs?
Oh, just that we're hoping to look at that in one of our upcoming studies. We don't have any data on that yet. But I know and we definitely have interest from people who are leading alternative schools in terms of thinking about how their students could benefit from dual enrollment. So that's another kind of population that we're interested in. So nothing to share yet, sorry.
Great. Well, you know, there's interest out there. Again, thanks to our presenters. Thank you all for joining us today. We hope everyone has a great afternoon.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.